Welcome to this pre-recorded session for the Qualtrics User Conference. In this session, we are going to discuss accreditation in a virtual world. I am Melanie Ross, and I'm a technical products developer for ANAB. ANAB is an accreditation body providing accreditation and training services to international standards across a variety of industries. During this session, we will discuss an overview of why virtual assessments are needed now more than ever. We will go over accreditation requirements that guide assessors and organizations when performing any type of assessment, whether remote or on-site. A risk-based approach to assessments will be reviewed, along with determining eligibility, maintaining confidence and quality, and working together. Then we will go over some tips for planning and preparation, as well as expectations and effective use of technology during remote or virtual assessments. We will round out the discussion by going over some takeaways from the presentation. While this is a virtual, pre-recorded session, please take note of any questions you may have. Questions can be submitted via email, which will be provided later in the presentation. There's no doubt that we can all agree that the past year to year and a half have been extraordinary. The pandemic has changed how we do business in many ways. One of the main reasons ANAB decided to go virtual with assessments is out of health and safety concerns, not only for our assessors, but also for the organizations that we assess. Additionally, the lockdowns and travel restrictions made it impossible to send assessors on-site to organizations to perform the assessments. These organizations rely on their accreditation to perform their work and provide services to their customers. So assessments needed to continue to take place to minimize impacts on business operations. Life and business must go on, so it was up to ANAB and other accrediting bodies and the international community to determine the best path forward. ANAB built on years of experience with remote assessments to develop a system that allowed for assessments to continue even when on-site visits were not possible. Accreditation requirements come from a variety of sources. There are four main sets of requirements that relate to accreditation. ILAC and IAF set policies related to accreditation and relevant international standards. These policies must be implemented by accrediting bodies, as well as those organizations that maintain accreditation. ILAC and IAF continue to monitor the developments in the worldwide situation and are aware of the risks to the accreditation process, and have acknowledged that remote assessments may be necessary for ongoing accreditation assessment activities. They also note that remote assessments must not compromise the integrity of the assessment or accreditation process. We will get into maintaining confidence and quality within the accreditation process later in the presentation. ISO IEC 17011 2017 contains requirements for accrediting bodies and must be followed when performing assessments. 17011 does allow for assessments to be performed remotely, but requires the accrediting body to follow their normal assessment process, such as assessment plans, opening meetings, issuance of nonconformities, and closing meetings and reporting. A key requirement here is that the time between on-site assessments shall not exceed 2 years. But the standard does provide the accrediting body leeway to determine if an on-site assessment is not applicable if another method can achieve the same objectives, such as remote assessments. These requirements flow into the requirements ANAB sets for accredited organizations. ANAB requirements include requirements on proficiency testing, internal auditing frequency, management review, and performing in-house calibrations, to name a few. Conformity to these requirements must be confirmed during any type of assessment, including remote assessments. Finally, regulators, scheme owners, and other stakeholders have requirements that must be included in the accreditation process. Oftentimes, these requirements were built around on-site assessments. Some do not allow remote assessments, so this is a challenge for these requirements. Exceptions have been made in some instances to develop an acceptable remote assessment process to meet the requirements of the regulator, scheme owner, and stakeholders. All of these requirements work together and must continue to be adhered to when adjusting our assessment plans and performing virtual or remote assessments to ensure confidence, competence, and conformity during the remote assessment. How does remote assessment compare to on-site assessment? What are our expectations? What are our goals? Our main goal is to perform the remote assessment as close to an on-site assessment as possible, where the major difference is using technology to communicate in place of face-to-face interaction. The expectations for performing remote assessments are the same. Demonstration of technical activities is still expected. We must assure conformance and competency of the organization to provide confidence in the activities being performed. The accrediting body and assessor expect to receive documents ahead of time in order to prepare for the assessment activity. Assessment planning and formal assessment plans are still part of the process. The assessor may spend more time offline reviewing documents and records than would normally be reviewed on-site, so the actual time online via video and audio for those activities may be shorter, but witnessing methods may take longer since the assessor is not on-site. Again, we want the assessment process to remain as close to on-site assessments as possible. With that said, though, this has provided us new opportunities, such as adding a new method to a scope that is within a familiar technology of the organization. This may now be able to be accomplished via remote assessment rather than sending an assessor on-site. When determining eligibility, we first have to ensure that the activity falls within the requirements of ISO IEC 17011, our international recognition requirements from ILAC and IAF, and scheme owner and regulatory requirements. Then, we use a risk evaluation process to ensure that planning is adequate for remote assessments. The accreditation manager and assessor must agree that remote assessment is an appropriate solution for the assigned activity. The organization being assessed also needs to be willing to participate in the remote assessment. The complexity of the scope and any scope changes also play into eligibility of an organization. Some scopes are just too complicated for remote assessment, as the technical evaluation would be hindered by the assessor not being on site. But with most scopes, remote scope evaluation can be performed to the same rigor as on-site. To facilitate remote assessments, documents and records need to be available electronically. If documents are only available hard copy, the assessor will not be able to review those remotely. And finally, the organization needs to have the technology to allow for remote assessment to occur, such as cameras, microphones, and internet access in the areas where technical witnessing and assessment activities will occur. We use a risk-based approach to develop the general assessment plan and help make decisions on the appropriate assessment techniques to be used. Factors that are considered include the complexity of the scope. Are all of the activities fairly simple and straightforward, or are they complex and detailed? Scope changes. Is the scope going to remain the same, or are there new activities that we have never witnessed before being added? Will a remote assessment allow for a detailed enough assessment of competence in this new method or technology? How many sites and locations of key activities are included in the assessment? Are there separate locations where these activities are being performed? Can a remote assessment approach work at each of these sites or locations? What type of quality assurance programs does the organization have in place? Is the program robust enough for ANAB to use to promote confidence in the organization's activities? What is the organization's accreditation history? How long has the organization been accredited? How many and what types of nonconformities have been identified in prior assessments? How have those nonconformities been addressed by the organization? How often has the scope changed? Have items ever been removed from the scope for technical reasons? How stable is the staff and management? And finally, what is the stability of the conformity assessment body or organization? Have any changes happened in the last year? Is there a new quality system or methods that have been implemented recently that have not been assessed on site previously. All of these questions and considerations add into the decision-making and risk analysis process in determining the best assessment approach. Again, it all comes down to the 3 C's: promote confidence, confirm conformance, and assure competency. ANAB must be able to maintain full confidence in the assessment process and accreditation decision when performing on-site or remote assessments. This is accomplished through a variety of avenues. First, the effective use of technology is used to evaluate and witness methods to the degree necessary to demonstrate competence and ensure conformity with requirements. This includes, but is not limited to, WebEx or other meeting platforms, webcams, phones, cameras, microphones, and the like, to allow the assessor a similar experience as an on-site assessment. Some organizations put a laptop on a cart and move it around the laboratory to allow the assessor the feel of being there. Close-up shots of records and other traceability information, such as equipment IDs, can be accomplished through the use of a separate phone video camera or a photo uploaded to the ANAB file sharing platform. Other organizations have cameras set up throughout the laboratory and switch from one to the other depending on what is being witnessed. ANAB provides access to WebEx to all assessors, but it is up to the organization being assessed to determine the best technology to assist in witnessing the activities necessary during the assessment. Document review is fairly easy to transfer from on-site to remote because ANAB utilizes a file-sharing platform for this purpose. Organizations upload documents to the platform for the assessor to review. If additional documents are needed during the assessment, those can be uploaded as well. With remote assessments, effective communication is key. Pre-planning is vital. The assessor needs to have an idea of who they are going to interview and when, so that those individuals will be available and ready to log in at the agreed-upon times for demonstration of technical activities. One challenge faced with remote communication is the whole issue of masks. The assessment with the laptop on a cart, the staff were wearing masks and facing away from the laptop when performing tasks. It was very challenging to hear what they were saying. In that case, a microphone was added to aid in hearing the narratives spoken by the staff performing the work. Flexibility is key here. Remote assessments may take additional time to adjust to the use of technology and the need to make changes if the technology is not working in the way it was intended. When on-site, the assessor can observe or examine the equipment while observing the method being performed. During remote assessments, this is more challenging. The assessor may rely on the staff of the organization to provide commentary on the equipment, such as equipment IDs, calibration status, etc. I've mentioned technology a few times. Without it, remote assessments cannot occur. First and foremost, be prepared for internet and connectivity issues. No matter how much planning is done, the internet is what it is and issues may occur. It is best practice to appoint a technical facilitator. This person's role is to ensure that the technology is working as expected and troubleshoots where needed. This way, the assessment can proceed while the facilitator troubleshoots. Use the technology that works best for you. If you know that WebEx doesn't work, let the assessor know so they can use a different platform. If you have webcams to use and they work in the laboratory area, use those. If Wi-Fi is spotty in certain areas, work with the assessor to determine if you can mock demonstrate the method in another area. Most assessments use multiple technologies. In noisy areas, it may be best to use a headset with a microphone to be able to hear and be heard effectively. Also, camera skills matter. Having one person dedicated to holding the camera will ensure that the assessor can see what they need to see in order to confirm conformance and assure competence for the methods they are witnessing. Practice ahead of time to get the best camera angle too. And finally, be aware of battery life for portable devices. Ensure time is planned into the assessment to charge devices if needed, or use portable chargers. Key takeaways here is to plan and practice, appoint a technical facilitator, and designate a camera person, and be ready for the unexpected. Your assessor can work through these unexpected issues with you. We saw that part of the risk-based approach to assessments includes an evaluation of the organization's quality management system. Throughout the pandemic, organizations have faced challenges in maintaining quality, including shutdowns and social distancing, and needing to change office space or worker schedules to adhere to the ever-changing recommendations. While some functions can be performed remotely, laboratory work must be done in the laboratory, so personnel availability can impact the performance of the methods. Alongside all of this are supplier issues, including equipment calibrations. The limitations accreditation bodies have on entering the laboratories also impact calibration service providers and suppliers of other services. Supply chains were impacted, making it difficult to get supplies, not just related to performance of methods, but also safety, such as gloves. Additionally, some laboratories may have had to alter their proficiency testing timelines because of availability of resources at the laboratory and at the proficiency test provider. All of these issues must be considered by the laboratory and the accreditation body when evaluating how the organization has maintained quality. Did they evaluate the risks of these issues and mitigate those risks? Is that sufficient to promote confidence in the competence of the organization to determine conformance using remote assessments? How can we minimize the risk to an organization's accreditation through the remote assessment process? Well, we need to work together to discuss options and start planning early in the process. Again, communication is key. Communication with the accreditation body and with the assigned assessor will ensure that the remote assessment is planned appropriately, for sufficient amount of time, and with the right technology. Prepare for the remote assessment. This will look a little different than preparing for an on-site assessment. How do we plan for remote assessment? The big bullet point here is early pre-planning with the assessor is key. For a remote assessment, there is more upfront work that needs to be completed to make sure the remote assessment is successful. Here we see that word again, technology. The organization and the assessor need to ensure they have suitable technology to perform the assessment. Again, this includes audio, video, screen share and computers, as well as the mechanism for sharing documents. It is also important to consider how people will be interviewed and where those interviews will take place. Since the assessor is not on site, the assessment will take a different pace, with possibly holding some questions until the person being interviewed is back in a conference room, for example. Test the technology ahead of time. This goes hand in hand with effective use of technology. Work out any dead zones before the assessment so that assessment time can be used effectively in observing processes and documenting conformance to requirements. Just to recap on one slide, prepare as you normally would by providing requested records and documents electronically. If documents are not available electronically, scan them for use during the remote assessment, if at all possible. Appoint a technical facilitator to help with technology, and use the technology that is best suited for the environment subject to the assessment. This may include headsets or microphones, in addition to cameras, computers, and phones. Plan for one person to operate the camera. This person should not be expected to participate in the assessment, to free up those that are part of the video witnessing. And finally, plan for technical demonstration of the scope. Consider what steps need to be queued up and when, so that the assessor can assess technical competence effectively and appropriately during the remote assessment. On the day of the assessment, be ready as you would for an on-site assessment. Come prepared to answer questions and facilitate technical witnessing. The assessment will flow similarly to an on-site assessment, with an opening and closing meeting, interviews, document review, and observation in the form of technical witnessing. Be prepared to switch between technologies. One technology may work best in a conference room, while another works best in the areas where work is being performed. Prepare for online and offline time. The assessor will take time offline to review records and documents, as well as prepare for the next online time. And keep in mind, remote assessments are generally less efficient than on-site assessments. Be prepared to accommodate for that. Accreditation bodies took actions to minimize the impact of the pandemic on accreditation, and one of the main actions taken was to implement remote assessments. A risk management oversight approach is used to ensure that the remote assessments are as effective as on-site assessments in promoting confidence, confirming conformance, and assuring competency. Use of technology is critical for effective technical witnessing and for completing the remote assessment. With proper planning and preparation by the accreditation body, the assessor, and the organization, remote assessments are a useful tool in continuing accreditations to international standards. I want to leave you with some additional resources from ANAB. ANAB has many different media to further your understanding of standards, accreditation, management systems, and assessments. On the ANAB website, there are free webcasts on a variety of topics. These webcasts are 5 to 20 minutes long, depending on the topic, and can be viewed at any time. ANAB also has a blog page with a wealth of information related to risk, accreditation, standard requirements, and others. We also offer webinars monthly. Our most recent one was on making quality work for everyone. Recordings of these webinars can be found at the link shown. And finally, ANAB offers trainings in many different areas, including internal auditing, standards, risks, and other topics. As with assessments, training has changed significantly with the pandemic and travel restrictions. All of our traditional in-person courses have been converted to online versions and include exercises and discussions related to the topic at hand. We also offer web-based, self-paced training. All of these resources can be found on the ANAB website at anab.ansi.org. While this is pre-recorded, if you have any questions related to the topic of virtual assessments, conformity assessment, accreditation, or training, please feel free to email us at anab@anab.org. If you would like additional information about the training offered by ANAB, you can contact us at training@anab.org. If you have questions about accreditation or the services ANAB provides related to accreditation, contact ANAB at anab.org. And if you are ready for a quote for accreditation services, contact Roger Muse at rmuse@anab.org. Thank you for listening to this pre-recorded session on accreditation in a virtual world. I hope you enjoy the rest of the Qualtrics User Conference.